Hey, okay, so I haven't done a person in history for quite some time, so I'm going to do a person in history. Max Fleischer. I actually did a video about one of his cartoons. It was Somewhere in Dreamland, and um, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about him. Now, he was a Polish American animator. He was also an inventor, film director, and producer. His inventions actually centered around animation. So, not like, well, I guess Lewis Carroll, a lot of his stuff had to do with, because he was a mathematician. So I can't really say. uh, so he was the head of Fleischer Studios. He co-founded with his younger brother Dave. He also has another brother, of course. But so yeah, his younger brother Dave did quite a bit of talking in the 60s, did interviews and stuff. Max Fleischer, I guess, really didn't do a lot of talking. But, well, I'll get into that. But their studio was here. A lot of his characters were like Koko the Clown, Betty Boop, Popeye, and later Superman. And one of his inventions was rotoscope. I looked up rotoscope. It's not easy to explain, so I will put a link in the description for you. It's actually very interesting. So, of course, I'm one of those weirdos that likes that kind of thing. You know, it interested me just really quick. It interested me because of the fact that in history photography, we learned a lot of the film advancements and stuff. We didn't learn rotoscope. I mean, we learned like mutoscope and that sort of thing, but with rotoscope, I had never heard of it until I was reading about this. So I'm kind of shocked. He also came up with bouncing ball technique with film. The one in particular that I remember, and it was on the same VHS as Somewhere in Dreamland that I talked about that my grandmother had. There was a Rudolph cartoon that was in like the 40s, I think. Um, and they sang Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, obviously, and it had the bouncing ball with the song. Of course, now we know the sing-alongs with Disney, which I will. It's kind of weird that they would use the bouncing ball technique for Max in Disney cartoons for the sing-alongs, but you know, be it the Disney, the Mickey head or what have you, we have Max to thank for that. The stereoptical process, which I will get into. Richard Fleischer was his son. Richard Fleischer, I will put in the description, but he was the director for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Disney version from 1954, which we all know is like, that's my jam. I love that one. So, I'm not really going to get into let's see. His family immigrated to the United States in 1887, settling in New York City. He attended public school, and he began his career at the Brooklyn Daily Eagle and was advanced as a photographer and later a staff cartoonist. He drew single-panel editorial cartoons and graduated to the full strips. Little Algae, that sounds familiar, and S.K. Sposher, The Camera Fiend, which is actually funny because I see these comic books from World War II that are of camera superheroes, and they're just regular people using cameras as. But anyway, these strips reflected his life in Brownsville and his fascination with technology and photography, respectively. Oh, that would be interesting, actually. both displaying his sense of irony and fatalism. I wonder if they can be found somewhere on the internet, because it doesn't show anywhere that I can actually see them. It was during this period he met a newspaper cartoonist and early animator, John Randolph Bray, who would later give him his start in the animation field. Okay, so let's go ahead and go down. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the description for you so you can read up on his path to receiving Fleischer Studio, getting into Fleischer Studios. But I'm going to start with Betty Boop. She made her debut in 1930. And of course, we know that she was she was fashioned after Helen Kane. The series, of course, then began. She debuted in 1930, and then a series came out of it in 1932. It became a big success for Fleischer. Of course, then Helen Kane filed a lawsuit against him, his studio, and Paramount, and said that it was a deliberate character of her, which, yeah, and created an unfair competition and had ruined her career. Now, I have to agree with her, because a lot of times what does happen even today, is that someone will make something like that, like a cartoon of somebody or a comic book and that sort of thing, and people will go nuts. And no fault to the fans or anything. It's just that's what becomes popular, and it does ruin the person's career, because then they aren't popular anymore. And well, this is the thing. The everything that I read about, because I got interested in the trial, and it just seemed odd, because something else about the because if you've ever watched a cartoon for Betty Boop, there's also singing in it, and it has like the baby sound is what they call it, and the baby technique of singing. And she was saying, Helen Kane said that she originated that. And during the trial, they brought in another singer from the 20s. Of course, this is now the 30s and early 30s, named Baby Esther Jones. Now, she got the name Baby Esther, the stage name Baby Esther, because she originated the sound, the baby sound. And the judge of of this trial, basically threw out Helen Kane's case because of the singing voice. Basically, he was saying she didn't have a case. It just seemed weird. I mean, it was like, but she said that it was a deliberate caricature and created unfair competition, which it does. It looks just like her. So I don't know. I mean, talk in comments, be civil about it. And because I'm no lawyer, so but it does seem very unfair to me, because it seems like the judge was just basing everything on the singing voice and the baby sound technique. And Baby Esther Jones was an African American singer, just like Helen Kane, so it wasn't like there was unfairness in that sense. But they were both. She claimed that she got the name Babyface because, I mean, Baby Esther. I'm sorry. Excuse me very much. I apologize. But that she got the name Baby Esther from the baby technique. And so the judge said, well, Helen Kane doesn't have a case then. But there was another side to it. So I don't know. I have to feel for Helen Kane, because that just doesn't seem fair. And I don't know, but what do you think? So, anyway, yeah, it just seemed weird to me. It just seemed very unfair. And, I mean, nothing against Baby Esther. She was just coming in to make the point that this sound has been around and everything. I don't think it so much mattered who originated it. It was just, and I don't know why that even had to be a part of it. I mean, I didn't see where. I mean, if you know more, then please tell me, because I'm very interested in this case. So, but anyway, so moving on to his other characters, and again, be civil about it when you talk about it, please. And so Popeye the Sailor Man, he's one of my favorites. I absolutely love the movie with Robin Williams and Shelley Duvall. Greatest business decision came with his licensing of the comic strip, which I don't know how long it's been around. Let's see if it says 1929. Okay, so that's when the comic strip, who was introduced to audiences in 1933. Popeye became a box office hit and was one of the most successful screen adaptations of a comic strip in cinema history. Much of this success was due to the perfect match of studio style combined with its unique use of music. I have to agree with that. I mean, especially when he opens up the can of spinach and you hear that music. By the late 1930s, a survey indicated that Popeye had eclipsed Mickey Mouse in popularity, challenging Disney's presence in the market. Okay, with that being said, Fleischer and Disney were like biggest competitors in animation. It was, which you're about to see. So, so be prepared, like Scar says, be prepared. In the mid 30s, his studio was producing 4 series: Boop, Popeye, Betty Boop, Popeye, and screen songs and color classics, which I kind of wish that they would do these cartoons where there's songs and all of that. I absolutely love that. And of course all the colors and everything. Because, you know, you had the silly symphonies and the merry melodies, and then of course, like Somewhere in Dreamland, where there was a song in there, and it was just very sweet. Resulting in 52 releases each year. From the very beginning, his business relationship with Paramount was a joint financial distribution. Okay. During the Great Depression, Paramount went through 4 bankruptcy reorganizations, which affected their operational expenses. Okay, so Fleischer was aware of the technical advancements of the industry, particularly in the development of color cinematography. And due to Paramount's financial restructuring, he was unable to acquire the 3-color Technicolor process at the start. This created the opportunity for Walt Disney, and this is where we see Walt Disney with his silly symphonies and how they changed, beginning with Flowers and Trees in 1932. But with Fleischer, he had what was called Cinecolor, which had the 2-color processes, and 2-color Technicolor. So there was like red and blue was the Cinecolor, and 2-color Technicolor was red and green. So these were his color classics. The first one was Poor Cinderella in 1934, which starred Betty Boop in her only color appearance, which I thought she had more, but what do I know? By 1936, this had died down for Disney, and he and Fleischer had the benefit of the 3-color Technicolor process, beginning with Play Safe, which is one I've never heard of. So then we come to the stereoptical process, a precursor to Disney's multiplane animation, which I'm not familiar with. I'll have to look that up. I will put a link in the description. Find it and put a link in the description. I'm sure that you guys know what it is, but I'm not as. So, The technique of stereoptical is a technique used 3D model sets replacing flat pane backgrounds with the animation cells photographed in front. Popeye the Sailor meets Sinbad the Sailor, and Popeye the Sailor meets Alibaba's 40 Thieves in 1936 and 1937. This is where you see it. This demonstrated Fleischer's interest in animated feature films. While he petitioned for feature films, it took 3 years, and it was not until New York opened at Radio City for Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1938 that Paramount executives realized the value of animated features and ordered one for 1939 Christmas release. So he had it, but Walt Disney... so you see the... just back and forth. And I think he took it far worse than Walt Disney did. I'm sure that Walt Disney saw him as a competitor, but he was more laid back about it. With Fleischer, it was like, so when it comes to Superman, Republic Studios allegedly failed to develop Superman as a live-action serial, much like the movie series with Houdini that I critiqued. It's weird to see it called a serial for some reason. I don't know why. So they were going to do a serial for Superman. Max acquired the license that Fallen initiated development. The cost for the Superman series had been grossly overstated for decades based on Dave Fleischer's 1968 interview. So he was the one that talked about it, not Max. The actual figure basically was considered twice the cost of a Popeye cartoon. Now, Superman was a reflection of the type of serious cartoons that were not being made by rival studios. Their science fiction fantasy elements appealed to Max's interest, finally leading the studio into maturity and relevance for the 1940s. So that's Superman. I'm not as familiar with the Superman animation. And, oh gosh. Following the war, he supervised the production of the animated adaptation of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer in 1948. That's the one I remember. Sponsored by Montgomery Ward. Does anybody remember that? I remember Montgomery Ward. It was still open when I was in high school. I don't remember when it fell through. And that's all it says about that. But I will look for it and put it in the description as well. In 1954, Max's son, Richard Fleischer, was directing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea for Walt Disney. This brought a luncheon that united Max with his former competitor and reunited him with a number of former Fleischer animators who were then employed by Disney. That had to suck. That had to be so tense. This meeting of the former rivals seemed cordial, and Max remarked that he was very happy making educational films at this point in his career. However, in his collection of memoirs entitled Just Tell Me When to Cry, Richard, who is the son, relates how at the mere mention of Disney's name, Max would mutter, "That son of a bitch." You gotta feel for the son having to deal with that, being in the middle. So, pretty much that is, I'm sure that at some point, because, when I was a kid, we saw, of course, the Looney Tunes, and they were mixed in with Betty Boop and Popeye, and I'm sure that you saw other Fleischer cartoons, much like the Somewhere in Dreamland and that sort of thing. So I'm sure that if you were to look up Max Fleischer cartoons, you'd be like, that's one. I've seen that before. And it's funny how many people think that it's from a particular animator, and it turns out that it's someone else completely. So, but anyhow, um, and before I go, before I close up, something that somebody said was that, yeah, Walt Disney is known, but Max Fleischer is one of the best. And, we all have our favorites and certain things. I like Andy Warhol. I think he's, and, he gave us pop art. But, we all fall in that, and we say that something is, and, but no matter what it is, be it music and whatever, whoever it is has contributed to that in one way or another. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't mean that they are, I mean, where would we be without Pablo Picasso and Max Fleischer? And so the animation industry has, I will say this, Walt Disney and Chuck Jones are known more. And so people like Max Fleischer and I don't remember the guy who animated Felix the Cat, um, but they're not as well known. So, and even Winsor McKay. Winsor McKay gave us, he was the one with Gertie the dinosaur, so he did some animation. Anyway, so they paved the way for animation. It's just the two names Chuck Jones and Walt Disney are known more. And but anyway, so this is Max Fleischer.